Welcome to Warfighters United, where veterans' voices are heard and transitional resources and programs are provided. This podcast is brought to you by Veterans of Foreign Wars, a service organization that provides our military and veteran resources and representation to our warfighters throughout the nation. They provide community support and the camaraderie we all miss being in the military. Join the VFW today and make a difference into your community. 12 years ago, I had the opportunity, a District Injured Support Coordinator, or a DISC for short, came to my house, and I was at a dark point in my life, and he said, I have some programs that you might want to think about. So I jumped off the edge, and I said, okay, let me try something new, and I got flown down to St. Louis, and I started this program called Focus Marines Foundation. On day 2, an individual, another Marine, came in. He had a patch over his eye, and he started giving a motivational speech for about 45 minutes to an hour. And in that speech that he gave, I started thinking about, if this Marine can deal with this kind of adversity and he can be severely wounded and come out of it and fall down 7, get up 8, and motivate me in the way that he did, what can I do to better myself, better my family, and how can I change so I can be more like him? And so today, I am honored to have our next guest on Warfighters United. Known as the Cigar Marine, a true patriot of the United States, a mentor, a motivator, an author of the Ultimate Marine Recruiting Guidebook, and once a Marine, an Iraq tank commander, inspirational memoir of combat courage and recovery. Silver Star recipient, Gunnery Sergeant Nick Popoditch. How you doing today, Gunny?
I'm good, Eric. That is a very, very kind introduction. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, I tell you, Nick, over the last 12 years, I've started constituting some of the things that you taught me over that year and a half down at Focus Marines Foundation to not only use my story to help others, other veterans, other families, but to try to make a difference in other veterans' lives that are sometimes in those low points. And if it wasn't for the Focus Marines Foundation and the things that I learned down there, I don't know if I'd be where I'm at today. But before we get into Focus Marines Foundation, you're very iconic when it comes to the Iraq War. But when I was actually doing my research, I noticed that you also served in Desert Storm and Desert Shield. Now, I don't get to talk to people about Desert Storm or Desert Shield that much, but what was that like on your first combat deployment to Kuwait?
Well, it was. It's kind of funny because when we finished that one, we finished it, and I was in Bravo Company, 2nd Platoon, 1st Tank Battalion. We finished that one at Kuwait International Airport. Was our last objective, and we ended up in Overwatch over the city. And when I deployed to Iraqi Freedom, we landed in Kuwait International Airport, and I was again in Bravo Company, 2nd Platoon, 1st Tank Battalion. I was in the same platoon 12 years later when we did the second one. But that one was, it was, we did war a little less often back then, whereas now there was a constant cycle of deployments. We were deploying, but we were doing, peacetime stuff. Westpac and, we, in my case, UDP over to Okinawa and back and those sorts of things. So when Saddam invaded Iraq or invaded Kuwait, people were watching on the news, and I thought, I used to make fun of them. I said, what are you, like some kind of, foreign affairs analyst? You're going to tell if we're deploying by watching the news? And then, like a week later, we're sitting out there in the desert, uploading combat ammo on the tanks and everything. So that would happen really quick. He invaded, and the next thing we knew, we were on a plane utilizing that Marine Corps MPF system, getting tanks off a boat and going up and manning a border. So it was, and that's what you joined to do. It was really fun. I really felt like I was out doing everything I joined to do, so it did. And when we did it, I guess if I was going to say one thing that majorly differed from the current ones was that it was much more conventional. There were, enemy that were in uniforms. They were using tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery. We were using all the whole combined arms thing, like you practice, like we trained for. It was very conventional. And I don't know if people remember the Iraqi army was before we got a hold of them, was the fourth largest army on the planet. It was a 1 million man army. It was humongous.
Wow,
but
I didn't even know that myself.
Yeah, it was a humongous military back then. They were quite a people thought quite a force to be reckoned with, but and when we did the newer deployments, the guys who never deployed before, I told them, I said, when you see this American war machine moving at full tilt, because when you train, you just see parts of it, but when you get out there, like in that case, the open desert, you see that whole full thing working at full tilt. You see the air bombing targets, the artillery hitting before you get there, artillery putting smoke down so you can close on the enemy. Infantry, tracks, everything. It's a very impressive war machine we have put together. And I was just proud to be a, very, very small piece of it commanding my tank.
So to our listeners out there that don't really know about tanks, kind of describe what a tank is, what it does, and what is its battle capabilities.
I absolutely loved it, and I'm gonna be very brief because that question I would love to talk for hours on that one, but I'm just gonna say it very simply for the sake of our show. But it's shock fire power mobility, and what is it? It's highly armored, it's very fast, and it has a lot of firepower. So what we like in the case of the Desert Shield, Desert Storm thing you're talking about, what our military used it for is once the objective's there, we use the tanks to close the open ground because we can take hits and we can deliver a pretty lethal punch. So we're really from that 4,000 meters into about 900 meters. We're going to close that ground. We're going to absorb the shock because we have good armor, and we have a very accurate cannon, 120 millimeter cannon that can deliver accurate main gun fire onto the objective, close, and then we're going to get to where we can put machine guns on the target, and then the infantry will close that last 900 meters. And usually the way we do it is they'll envelop from the side, come in and stick bayonets in people, and that's how we win. So it's really to close that gap across open terrain, to lead because it has the armor. And when we got into the urban fights, like in the newer war, that one of the things we would have a phone on the back, because we still at Marine Corps, we still do it old-fashioned John Wayne style with the tank in the front, the infantry behind it, using it for using it for protection. And we have a phone, a headset that they can talk to the crew inside the tank. And I used to put on that box where the headset was. I'd open it up and I'd put directions: 1, grab handset; 2, seek cover with all these exclamation points after it. It's reel that cord all the way out. The tank can take the hit. You just got a flak jacket between you and bad things. So reel that cord all the way out. Let me get out ahead a little bit here, and then you do what you do. Once we've absorbed the initial shock, whatever the enemy's going to put on us, because in the current war, when they took the uniforms off and they started hiding amongst the civilian populations, they have a great advantage when it comes to camouflage. They can get really close to you before they have to commit to fighting you.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. I remember that when we invaded Iraq and all those uniforms came off, you didn't know who was friend or foe. Now, you go back into Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003 when we invaded, and you helped lead the march to Baghdad. Now, what was that like, marching all the way to Baghdad from Kuwait in a tank?
A lot of change. The last I'd seen these Iraqis was Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and they were fighting me and and all that. And so on this one, now this was going to be fought amongst the Iraqi civilians. And if you remember, General Mattis told us all back then, no better friend, no worse enemy. So, there's 25 million people live there. We don't want to fight all 25 million of them. We just want to fight the enemy regime. We want to fight the Saddam loyalists. So it was that part of it. I didn't know what to expect. I don't think anybody really knew what to expect out of the Iraqi civilians. But as we went north, the part that really amazed me was how much the Iraqi civilians embraced us, how much we embraced them, because they were amazing people. That was a part of it that was totally unexpected to me, was how much us and the Iraqi people would get along really well. Everywhere I would stop in the tank, because I would generally be the forward edge of the battle area in the tank, I'd be in the lead. Everywhere I'd stop, I could get off the tank and I could ask for an English speaker, and I'd find somebody who spoke English, and I could have them help direct direct people, like, hey, keep people off the road. Can you, keep them away from the tank, do this, do that. And they loved to help. There were a lot of refugees on the road because people knew we were going to Baghdad. And so everybody north of us was heading south just to get out of the way of the war. So all the roads would be full of refugees on the side of the road. And you'd see, like, people in their houses would set water out for all the refugees on the road. And they'd stop and they would give each other water and stuff. It was inspirational to watch such a big change happening in their country and how upbeat, how well they handled it, with their heads up. I really grew to really like the Iraqi people. That was a part of it. It was unexpected, a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, on that note, I remember when we were pushing up to Baghdad as well, and, it came to a point where we were starting to give some of our MREs to the people because they were so hungry. And what we didn't realize at that time, before the sandstorm hit and we were stopped for 3 days, we were moving so fast, so quickly on our march up to Baghdad that some of the supplies couldn't get to us. And so there was a day or two gap between when we got resupplied, and we didn't know that was coming. And so by the time that happened, we didn't have anything because we were giving out all of our extra stuff to the people of Iraq that were hungry because they were always asking, right? And
what a Marine story, Eric. That is fantastic. That is a very Marine story. That's what Marines do. That is awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing to see them accept us and be happy that we were there. And when you got to Baghdad, I know that there was a very iconic part, and I was actually at Firdos Square the day after you did what you did. Can you fill us in on how that came about?
Sure. We were just taking ground. We, doing what Marines do. And at this point, once we got into Baghdad, the civilians seen Americans coming into their capital city. So they knew, now this is getting ready to come to an end in some way. They knew that whatever was going to happen now because we were there. And so they hid. They all kind of went underground. They got in. I don't know if they have basements in many of those houses, but they got off the streets. The streets were deserted, and so we were. So it was like even though Baghdad is a humongous city, it was like going through a ghost town. Everywhere, once we started getting into the inner parts of Baghdad, it became very ghost town like, and we just kept taking ground. We just kept moving, and we end up in a place called Firdos Square. And we got there. There's a big image of Saddam Hussein, big, humongous statue, like a 40-foot tall statue. It's in the center of Baghdad. There, it's right on the river, and it was iconic to the Iraqi people, but in a different way than we knew. To them, it was a symbol of oppression. It was, you don't speak out. The dictator is always watching. All these images of Saddam were very powerful to the people. And for us, it was just a good place to set a defense because there's a big open park with the statue in the middle. So tanks, we tend to do it almost Old West style. We'll circle the wagons when we stop, and we circled up. If we don't know where the enemy may come from, we just make what we call a coil, a circle, and we all orient outboard. And so we're all oriented outboard around this statue. And to the Iraqi people, that had a very powerful symbolism. There was this image of oppression, and now there were Americans all around it. And they thought, you know what, maybe we can trust these guys. That General Mattis, no better friend, no worse enemy stuff. And they came out, and they were greeted with the handshake of a friend, of an ally. And these civilians started coming out, and they started pouring out then. And they started celebrating the arrival of the Americans down there. And they turned their attention to that statue, and they started trying to knock it down. And a kid there asked he happened to ask our tank retriever, where all the mechanics ride. It's got a boom on the front. It's got a 1,500 horsepower engine. It's a very powerful vehicle. And they said, hey, Mister, can you help us tear down the statue? And so that M88 tank retriever rolled out there. They threw the boom out. They hooked up that 90-ton winch and snatch block up around Saddam's deck with a chain. The Marine who did that, his name was Corporal Eddie Chin, and just a great guy. He's a New Yorker, and I connect with him every so often, not as often as I should, but just a great American, great guy. he went up there, and Eddie was he was a tank mechanic. He was, a guy who does a lot of thankless work in our company. And then there he was up there on top of that thing. People all around the world were watching this guy noose up old Saddam up there and tear down that statue. And to the people, though, when that statue went down, they went nuts. They were rejoicing. And what I realized I was looking at there, the whole thing kind of came home to me. That these were people who'd grown up their whole lives under a dictator. They'd never known a day's freedom. And now they were celebrating this first taste of liberty, this first taste of freedom. And I tell you, you got good days in the Marine Corps. That will always be one of my favorites. One of the days I'll carry that one with me. Just the privilege of having been there to see that.
And that was kind of the sign that we were there to topple their dictatorship. We were there to take control and hand that country back to the people. And I was there the next day. I was with General Conway on 1 MEF as his PSD team, and we arrived there the day after. And I'm here to say that they were still celebrating a day after. There were still people coming out and looking at that statue, Iraqi civilians, that were still rejoicing and celebrating the next day. And I don't know how long that lasted, but that is probably one of the most iconic spots. And when that happened, they took a picture of you, and you were smoking a cigar. Now, I know you were celebrating, but you were kind of celebrating something different when you were smoking that cigar. What was that?
No, I've read different things people have said about that picture, and I think you've read something on that. But no, I wasn't celebrating anything other than.
Oh, okay.
So here's the truth on the cigar. It's going to be far less cool than the story you heard.
Okay, all right.
My commanding officer came over to use my radios. He was on the ground. I was still manning the perimeter. And he came over to use my radios, and he was smoking a cigar. And I told him, we need to talk to what freak you need to put on, because you have really good radios on the tanks. And he said you need to talk to battalion or whatever. I can't even remember who he was talking to, but I put him on the right freak and handed him a headset. And when I handed it to him, he handed me a cigar. So I'm up in the turret of my tank. I took a big puff on it. And apparently that's when somebody shot that picture, but it wasn't even my cigar. It was my CO cigar. Oh, hey. He just handed it to me, and I just happened to be smoking it when he took the picture. Now, obviously, this was a great place to celebrate, a great thing to celebrate this getting to Baghdad. But no, I was a career Marine. I was a staff sergeant. I knew we were far from done. I wasn't celebrating the end of nothing, but. The guy who took the picture, he was an AP guy, a French Associated Press guy, and he said, he told me that he had taken that picture, and he told me that he had sold it all around the world. I guess he had satellite, however reporters do whatever they do. And I said, great. I said, well, if I've done this for you, do me a favor, because by then there were reporters and there was media there. It had become a big event. I said, I'm going to write my home phone number down, call this number, and tell the woman who answers the phone to watch this on TV, because it was me and my wife's wedding anniversary. It just happened to coincide with this day. So yeah, I was celebrating that, but not in the manner which I had no special cigar for it or nothing like that.
Okay.
But I did get the caller from Baghdad, which was really fun. The guy said, "Hey, call yourself, my friend," and he handed me this satellite phone, which I had no idea how to operate. I'd never had a satellite phone in my life, and he showed me how to work it. And I called my wife right after smoking that cigar, which was really nice.
Well, I hope it was a Cuban, because over in Iraq, Cubans were not illegal, and somehow they made it into our hands every now and then.
Well, I will tell you that after that picture, because that picture ran all over the world, and it ran on the front page of Marine Corps Times and stuff like that, which I got a lot of crap for when we were on the ship coming home. A lot of people gave me a hard time.
I'm sure.
And but because of that picture, a lot of people have given me a lot of great cigars over the years. And just many places I go, when people know of me or that picture, first thing they'll do is hand me a lot of good cigars. So I have smoked a lot of Cubans as a result of that picture.
Well, that's not a bad thing. They are tasty.
No, not a bad thing at all.
Now, So you get done with our first tour, we spent about 6 or 7 months over there, and we start handing it over to the guys who are going to occupy it, the Army and whatnot. And a few months later, the Marine Corps decides that we need to go back in again. And so you volunteered to go on a second tour. I was there in 04 and 05 as well with a different unit, with 3rd LAR Charlie Company. But you were actually part of the first Battle of Fallujah in April, which I wasn't there yet for my second tour. I arrived a little bit later than that. What was that like? Because you already knew what you're going to come into. That battle was a very courageous battle. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
That deployment, there was a lot of unknowns because we were taking over. We were doing relief in place. I believe it was the Army's 82nd. And a lot of people didn't know what to expect. A lot of people in the chain of command exactly how intense this deployment was going to be. So we had prepared for everything. We had prepared for even if we weren't going to be on the tanks, we prepared to do dismounted stuff, which we did do a lot of. In my platoon, we had four tanks, 4 trucks, and we were equipped to either go out in tanks, go out in trucks, Humvees, we call them trucks, go out in, Humvees, or go out on, boots. And it was funny because the Marines would always ask me when I'd start giving them the op order, they'd say, "We taking the tanks or the piglets?" They'd always call the trucks the piglets. But, so we prepared for every possible escalation of this. Back then there was a term called the 3-block war, and we were very much prepared for all of that. We were prepared for high-intensity combat, the urban terrain with the tanks, low intensity out, on the Humvees and amongst the civilian population, or humanitarian stuff out there in soft covers doing. We were prepared for every bit of it. And it turned out to be the high-intensity one, and it turned out to be the first Battle of Fallujah. And and this is going to sound weird, but I really enjoyed that battle because that battle was exactly what we trained to do. There were a lot of bad guys in that city. We had all the stuff we do as a Marine amphibious unit. We had tanks, we had infantry, we had tracks, we had artillery, we had air power, we had everything. And so it was exactly how you trained to do it. Now, the hard part was the city still had like 300,000 people in there too, so you had to be discriminatory on how to fight it. And so we're fighting these pitched battles in the street, but there's civilians still in all these buildings as well, which made the tank a very effective weapon in there. A lot of people wouldn't expect that if you've never really dealt with tanks. But our fire control system, because people see that big cannon and they think of it like an artillery piece, that it's going to fire somewhat not precisely, and it's going to have a big splash, but it's much more accurate than that. It's very precise. I can kill somebody and not harm a hair on the head of somebody to his left or his right. And it's got 10 power optics. It's got thermal sights. It's got incredible armor, so you can put it right in the middle of the street, and you can just slug it out with whatever the bad guys will throw at you, And the way we operate, I would be in the lead. My wingman would be behind me, so he's watching my back and my flanks, and then we'd have infantry that would be up in the buildings all around me, just slightly behind me, and it's very effective. So the danger area for the tank would be to get behind me, to get to that rear and to the back sides. But with the way we operate, it's very difficult for the enemy to get into those positions. So we were able to take ground very effectively, and I don't think they were expecting that. And when we got to, because the enemy at that point, I like to refer to this as the Darwin era of the enemy, that we were kind of weeding out all the stupid ones at this point. And they really didn't know what to expect out of our tanks. I think they were totally caught by surprise on what we could see of them that they couldn't see of us, because I could be looking down the street with a thermal sight. They think they're perfectly safe inside of a building in the shadows, and I'm looking at them plain as day. And so I think that caught them by surprise, and in particular at night, I think they were really caught off guard by how quiet the tank was. We did a tactic then. I'm kind of proud of this. I kind of came up with this. we would use an AC-130 gunship, and they fly very low and they're very loud. They're if you remember those days, the C-130s.
You can hear it when they come fly by. You know it.
Yeah, they're very loud. They're louder than the tank on the ground. So I think we would catch the enemy all concentrating on what was up above them, which they couldn't see either. They couldn't see that. And the tank is rolling down the street, and I'm turning corners, and they're all right out in the open. And they don't know this as well, that the C-130 is talking to me. He's up above, and he's talking to me. He's telling me exactly what I'm going to see when I breach the next intersection and stuff like that. What's out on my flanks and all that.
Well, right, and because those streets are so narrow, it's hard to even traverse, right?
Yeah, some of them can get very, very narrow. Yeah, that's actually where I got hit on a street like that. Was one. It was very narrow. It was hard for me to get. But the tank packs a lot of punch. We have a lot of machine guns, and in my case, as a tank commander, I'd be up top. I'd have my rifle right next to me as well. So, because I'm about even with the second-story windows in the cupola of my tank.
Oh,
so a lot of times it would be that close. It'd be a 10-foot engagement with me and somebody in a window of a building. So there were a lot of things that tank could do that they weren't expecting. They weren't expecting a guy with a rifle looking right in their second-story window, from 10 feet away, and everything up below my chest is completely armored in the tank's turret. I don't think they were expecting those sort of things. So the tank packed a lot of punch that they just didn't account for. And I think we were very, very successful on that first Fallujah in terms of destroying the enemy.
Running a small business is tough, but you don't have to do it alone. The Small Business Association of Michigan provides tools, connections, and advocacy to help you succeed. Join thousands of fellow entrepreneurs at sbam.org.
Yeah, well, when I was reading your book, Nick, you actually give credit to the guy that shot you with the RPG, and you could tell you kind of explain it to where you can tell he wasn't your average fighter, and so you thought it was a Republican Guard. What made you think that?
When I replayed it in my mind, because I was on a very narrow street, I was in the lead, and I went into an intersection, and I'm scanning for enemy. And when I scanned to my right, there was a RPG man. He was on a rooftop, and he was in a good firing position. And usually what they would do, because I'd been hit by a lot of rockets up to this point there, and they just, they just take a wild shot. Most of them miss. Very rarely would I even get hit compared to all the ones that were shot at me. They would just take a wild shot, like they just want to get their shot over with and run. And little did they know that when they would take that shot, because the streets were so full of trash, the backblast would just silhouette them perfectly. It would make them a very good target when they would do this. But this guy, he took a good shot, good well-aimed shot. He got in a good firing position. He squeezed it off, and he hit me right where we had intel that they had captured from the enemy that had diagrams of our tanks and showed where they thought they should hit it, where they thought what the soft spots were. And that's right where he hit me. It turns out it was actually some of the best armor on the tank. Is right. They somehow thought it was a soft spot, but it in no way was. And so he hit me right where that mark was on the diagrams they had showed us. And but it was to no effect. And when I was swinging my machine gun over to kill him, he obviously was operating as part of a team. There was a second one that put one right on my hatch, put one right on me, and just a hell of a shot. So and I'd raised my hand 5 times up to this point. I do solemnly swear to support and defend. So I certainly knew what I was getting into. And I strongly suspect these guys on the other side, they were those sorts of guys as well, that had a lot of miles on them, knew what they were doing. And, so if I was going to characterize him, I'd say I was squaring off against one of my own. He was a career guy in their military. Somebody who'd done this for, quite a bit of their life.
Yeah. So when I was also reading, you were awarded the Silver Star. And part of that was in that scenario when you got hit, you were actually going down to help pin down Marines at another intersection. How did that all play about?
Well, we went in there before the battle actually started. I went into the city a day before the battle actually started. we'd sent a security patrol in, just dismounts, and we'd sent them in there to because we were starting to take RPG shots. We were in defensive around the city while they were still shaping the battlefield. And our defensive, we were starting to take RPG shots. We were starting to receive RPG shots, starting to receive mortar rounds. So the enemy was getting very close to us, so we wanted to push them back a couple blocks into the city before we started the full-scale invasion of it. So they sent a security patrol in, and the patrol got hit hard, like a block in. And, so the enemy obviously had pushed very close to our defensive. And, up to that point, we'd been doing a lot of patrolling and stuff like that. But when they engaged that security patrol, because I had my tank shut down, I was sitting in defensive, so I could hear it all, and I could hear sustained fire. I could hear multiple RPG shots. So okay, it's a little different. They're not just taking pot shots at us and running. They're in a prepared position there because they're firing away with a machine gun and all that. So I'm cranking the tank up, and we went in, and we got there. I could see where the patrol had been hit. There was a guy had been shot right there. And, then I start looking at all our guys, and I can see where all their weapons are oriented. I'm like, okay, so that's obviously where they're taking the fire from. Because with the tank, you got hearing suppression on and all that stuff, hearing protection on. So you have to kind of pick a lot of things up visually more so than hearing them at that point with the tank running. And so I'm looking at where all their weapons are oriented, and now I start putting those high-power optics to work, and we can find them. And again, these are things that surprise them because we have those machine guns, and with us, I carry 3,000 rounds in a ready bin for one of the machine guns. The other one, I have to reload each box, but one of those machine guns, I can fire till the cows come home, until I melt the barrel. And so what we can do is once we locate them, we can put a sustained fire on them. And the architecture there is so, behind where we are that whatever they're hiding behind, I'm just going to chew right through it. And then once I get that caliber 50 on it, whatever building they're in might as well be made out of paper. That 50 is going to go right through whatever they're hiding behind. And so that's once we got in and got those machine guns going, that allowed this infantry platoon that had taken all those hits to now start bringing those guys out, start medevacing them out, get them out. And then we got a fresh platoon in there. And the company commander, I'm trying to recall his name, good guy. And the company commander said, no, I said, hey, we're in here. They're ready to fight. Can we stay? And he said, yeah, go get them. And so me, my wingman, and this platoon of infantry, this was Fox Company 2-1, 2nd Platoon. We just went to work in there. And so we were there a day before everybody else, but we did it was really nice because we were the only ones in there. So I knew anybody shooting anywhere was bad guy. I didn't have to deconflict like for just a chance somebody to my left or right has gotten out ahead of me or anything like that. It was very much very, very able to just engage very quickly, which in this sort of environment with the civilians in there, you want to be able to engage quickly before they can hide.
Of course. What really struck me is after you were hit, you weren't thinking about anything else but the guys on your tank. You started calling out, making sure they're okay, and meanwhile, these guys are trying to get you to safety. I mean, what was that like thinking back on it now with these guys coming and a young driver that's probably never drove in streets that much? You had your gunner that, later on it states that, he was up returning fire so he could get you to a medevac point. I mean, nowadays when you think about it, what comes to mind?
I loved training when I was in. I loved everything about it. I really got into it as a Marine. I'd been a drill instructor. I loved the psychology of training and all that. And so one of the things I always loved to drill into my guys were certain things like fail-safes, things that are never wrong. I'd always tell them, you get confused, you get this, that, or whatever, and you don't know what else to do. Do this, because it may not be the most right thing, but it's never wrong. And two of these things would come into play there. One of the things I would drill into them over and over and over is if you get hit, and I would make them say it, and I'd say, you get hit, what do you do? They say, move, Gunny, move. You can move. If the enemy hits you once, he's going to hit you again if you stay right where you're at.
Of course.
So I'd always tell them, move. And I'd always tell the driver, I said one of the things we found out from the test of the M1A1 is one of the most common things that happens when it gets hit by enemy fire is the communication link between the turret and the driver gets severed somehow. It's just something that commonly happens when the tank gets hit by something big. And so I'd always tell the driver, you get confused and you don't know what else to do, just go straight at the enemy. That's our best armor is up front. We're the smallest silhouette when we're pointed right at the enemy. So you don't know what else to do, go straight at them. And if you don't know where the enemy is, because the turret moves independent of the hull where the driver's at, I said, just keep turning until you see the gun. When you see the cannon, I said, just keep turning until you see the gun. When you see the cannon, get bad guys. So get centered under that and go that way. If you don't know what else to do and you can't talk to nobody. So I didn't know this when I got hit. Now, when I got hit, the last command I'd given that driver was to stop because I was going to engage the guy who hit the side of my turret with the RPG. So when I got hit, I remember just, for one, being, aware that I'd been hit. I knew I'd been hit, and I knew I'd been hit really hard. I'd been blinded, deafened, and I knew it was something. I knew it was a big weapon system. I was pretty sure it was an RPG. It's weird that I would have this sort of, awareness, but I do remember being aware of those things. I remember being a little surprised, all that. But the thing I really wanted the tank to do was get moving. And that was the thing they did all those fail safes came into play. They got that tank moving. The driver took off straight ahead. He just continued to press forward into the attack, which was the last thing they were expecting me to do. And when I was looking for my crewman, I was looking for my gunner because my gunner is the second in command, and he rides down inside the turret. And I'm looking for him. His name was Corporal Chambers, and it still is Corporal Chambers. And I said, "Hey, Chambers, I'm looking for him." And he wasn't in the gunner's position anymore because he'd seen the gun. I'd been hit pretty badly. I'd been hit in the head, had a lot of holes in my head, a lot of holes in my neck, and so I was bleeding pretty profusely. And they knew that, my gunner knew this was time. He had to take charge of the tank and get that tank moving. So he climbed up into the cupola, the commander's hatch, right where I'd just been blown out of, and took command of the tank, got the tank moving. My loader, Lance Corporal Hernandez, he was wounded himself. So was the gunner. All three of them had been hit by shrapnel from the grenade that hit me. And they were wounded. But they were up there manning those machine guns, fighting, heading forward into the enemy, and just fighting to save my life. And and the tank was on fire on top. The blast that hit me had lit all the gear on top of the tank on fire. And so they're up there, the top of the tank's on fire. They're fighting with those machine guns. But we don't carry corpsmen on the tanks, so And I'm beyond the point of first aid. I'm going to bleed to death pretty quickly if they don't get me to somebody much more professional than just what we got in our first aid kits. So they got to figure out where they're at. And my driver, Lance Corporal Frias, he's probably 19 years old. This was his first deployment. This probably was his first real fight. And a year before he was at his high school senior prom. He was our boot. And
wow.
He got us to the medevac site. And those three guys, I'm alive today because of those three guys. And I think a lot of it is that Marine Corps stuff, that just the things we drill constantly, the things we do, that when the time came that it was time to do it.
Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Isn't that what we always say? And
yeah,
so drilling them into that really plays a huge part. Now,
it's funny. I would always put casualties on anytime we were training. I'd always put a casualty in there, and I'd make them go through the whole procedure. I'd make them do the mock first aid. I'd make them do the reporting procedure. And, one of the reports was always, immediately let me know as a platoon sergeant. And then the last thing I would always do on these, I would say, okay, what if I'm the casualty? And then I'd make them do it all with that equation.
Little did you know how much that would play a part.
Little did I know that would actually get played out for real.
I tell you what, I bet you those guys were having flashbacks probably like later on. I cannot believe all those times that he had us put him as the medevac. Then it actually happens. That is uncanny in the craziest sense. So you get back to the United States. You're healing up. When did you just decide to write the book Once a Marine?
I was very blessed because one of the hardest things in the beginning was one of the great things was I had a great medical. Balboa and Naval Hospital. There was a doctor there that restored sight to my remaining eye because my one eye was blown out of my head, when I got hit. But the other one, it got knocked down into my sinus cavity and was very badly damaged from shrapnel, and the retina was really messed up. And I couldn't see. I'd been blinded. And I was blind for a while there, and I had a great doctor at Balboa Naval Hospital restored sight to that eye. But it was not 100% sight. The sight was very badly damaged. It was, what would be the medical term would be legally blind. And most important for me, I couldn't read or write at this point. I just couldn't see anything clear enough. I mean, unless you made the letters as big as a billboard, I couldn't read anymore. And on active duty, nobody really deals with this kind of eyesight, at least not back then. So where I get my medical care at the Naval Hospital, nobody really knows how to deal with this in terms of rehabilitating it. They know how to fix it. They know how to, do all that stuff. But how do I rehabilitate? How do I start living my life again? They didn't know, and they just didn't have the people there for it. It's not what they do. Active duty, we're all ready to go out and locate, close with, and destroy enemy. We're not blind guys trying to figure out how to white cane around or something like that. So it's just not the right tool for the trade and for the task. And so somebody recommended this place, Palo Alto. It was on the VA side, but they let me go there on active duty. But it was a VA hospital, and it was called the Western Blind Rehabilitation Center. And when I went there, it was life-changing for me. Now this place deals with people with vision like mine and how to turn that into a viable life and how to and that's where the realization also started hitting me that my life was going to exist outside the Marine Corps, from here on, because outside the active duty Marine Corps, because, you put a rifle in my hands, I'm as likely to hit my own guys, at this point, with this vision I got, so I'm not exactly going to be a high-stepping global warrior with vision like what I got going on now. And so at the Blind Rehabilitation Center, they taught me all kinds of things. I mean, just how to get back to living again. And one of the things they taught me was the first computer I ever turned on in my life was in the rehabilitation center. And I had my computer skills instructor, Dan Nakamura, and I reconnected with him about a year ago. And it was really fun to talk to him again because I had talked to him since which was 20 years ago. And he taught me how to use a computer. They have all kinds of adaptive software. They have something called JAWS, which is all voice. Anyway, that wasn't the one I used. I used one called ZoomText. And ZoomText was adaptive software to allow magnification, visual, verbal cues on various things. It's a really amazing technology. But I didn't know how to use a computer, much less this stuff. So he would have me do things every train, just like we did in the Corps. It was training, it was training on a different task. And so he'd have me write things every day, and that's what. And he said, "Well, journal." Back then, I was a much less receptive guy to things than I have today. So I'm like, I'm not going to journal. Am I in middle school?
You went from a warfighter to writing in a journal.
Have you mistaken me for a middle school girl? What the heck? And so I was much less receptive to that sort of thing. It's, well, write something, write about how you got hit. So okay, so I wrote this thing about how I got wounded. I wrote it down, and I wrote it. It was very after action reportish. Let's go with that.
Okay,
it wasn't exactly a literary work of art. It was very informative, but anyway, it gave me something to write constantly. And I shared it with somebody, and it was a friend of mine. And the friend said, "Hey, do you mind if I share this with some other people?" I said, "Sure, do what you want with it, And they started sharing that story around, and then I started getting contacted by people. And eventually, a good friend of mine that I had known for a little while, I hadn't been friends with him for very long, he was a civilian guy, and interestingly enough, I'd met him over a tank ride. It was kind of a dog and pony thing, but he was a good guy. We stayed friends. And he also, this guy in particular, had a lot of experience in publishing and things like that. And he said, you know what, I think we might have something here. You know, would you be interested in writing more about this? I don't want to hear about I don't think, you know, there are people who want to hear about it, but I think what people really want to hear about is what happened after all this.
Yeah, you know, and that's kind of how I got to meet you. You became a fixture at Focus Marines Foundation. You became a motivational speaker. You use what happened to you not only to better yourself, but, man, the way you got back up on that horse and started going full force like you were, you know, probably drill instructor mojo going on. After that, what kept you pushing forward?
You know, I'm gonna say something that might be surprising to you, but to me, it was simply lack of options. Lack of options. I mean, what was the alternative, to just lay down and die? I mean, I was 40 years old, which is way old for active duty military, but way young for the rest of the world. You know, what am I going to do? I'm just going to pack it in at 40 years old. I still had kids in the house. I still had an 11-year-old, 12-year-old. Boy, my other boy was grown up by then, out of the house. But, you know, I still had a kid who's looking at me for leadership, for mentoring, for an example. You know, because when I think back to my father, and he's passed away for 20 years now, but I think back to when I was growing up, you know, I never saw my father call in sick one day ever that I could ever recall in my life. My father went to work every day. My father got up. He worked in a factory. He was a hard-working guy. And that example he set for me about what a man does. What was I going to do? Not do that for my son? You know, I can't. I couldn't pack it in. So I would. It was much more simple. I would kind of call it a lack of alternatives in that, or maybe all the other options were much, much worse. Was that I'm not going to pack it in, and I had no desire to. I had no desire to just call it quits then. And I think even to, like, if you were to parallel to when I got hit, you know, a lot of people will ask me, you know, how close to dying or did we, you know, and all that. And it took multiple blood transfusions to keep me alive and stuff like that. But to me, I never thought for a second that I was going to die, or never thought. I mean, my mind just doesn't operate that way. That, you know, it's been a good run. Let's call it a day. You know, I don't know how somebody's mind does it. I don't think most do. And so when people ask me about it, like, how'd you do it? I said, well, just lack of options. You know, you do the same thing. You just haven't been put in that circumstance. But if you were put in that circumstance, you'd get back on your feet. You'd start stepping forward. I mean, to me, the harder part was where to step forward. You know, what to do. It wasn't the desire to do it or the, you know, any of that. It was knowing what to do, because the previous life I'd had were all very physical jobs, were all very visually dependent jobs, and now here I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And at this point, I'm just learning how to read and write again. So, like a real genius, I said, hey, I'll be a school teacher. Something that was way, way outside the comfort zone. And, but more because I always wanted to do that. And it probably wasn't the best fit for my visual skill set, but it made a great challenge. And I think that's what we all exist for. I remember one of my mentors growing up in the Marine Corps growing up, he gave me this thing from Vince Lombardi, and it was called Winning Habits, What It Takes to Be Number One. And I used to put it on the side of my tank turret every time I deployed. Even on the tank I got hit on, it was on the side. And it's just, that's who we are as Americans, as Marines, as men, that we live for the fight. We live for a challenge. We live for something. And when you stop doing that, it's just a slow decline. And at least I guess, you know, I was aware enough of that, maybe not even on a conscious level, just on a subconscious level, that I knew you got to keep stepping forward. I may have stepped forward in the wrong direction quite a few times, but at least I always knew keep stepping.
Well, I tell you what, you keep stepping has probably helped thousands upon thousands of veterans, Marines, soldiers, you know, just get the confidence to be able to try to put that foot forward again, over and over again. And so let's talk about Focus Marines Foundation. It's a 7-day transitional program down in Augusta, Missouri. You've become a fixture down there for the last decade and a half, 2 decades. Tell me a little bit about that program and what it does for our guys.
Yeah, I've been very blessed, and as you said, we've been around since 2010. We're on our 15th year. We put 50 sessions. We're on our 51st session. That actually starts this Saturday as our 51st.
Oh, wow.
Session.
Okay.
And over 1,000. We're at about 1,150 graduates. And as you said, and you being one of them, it's a life-changing thing. It's hard to think that 8 days could make that big a change. A Saturday to Saturday could make that big a change in your life. And what it really is, it's just setting your feet on that path. And it may not be the path you're going to stay on, but knowing that you got to keep stepping forward. And so we do. We do accept all branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, but we are very Marine specific. And the reason, 80 to 90% of our classes will be Marines. And it's not because we're exclusionary or anything like that, because the soldiers, sailors, airmen love this course. They fit right in. But as Marines, one thing I think we do really well is we do teamwork really well, and we do culture really well. And that's what we're building there, is we're going to build a team of people. Everybody's going to be on an individual walk, but we're going to do it together as a team, because there's going to be times throughout that session you're going to need to lean on that individual to your left, to your right, and they're going to help you, and you're going to help them, and you're going to learn from them, and they're going to learn from you. So we do teamwork really well, and we do culture really well. We do that warrior culture, and that's what we're reconnecting all our participants with. Is that all those great skill sets that made you good on a battlefield, they're going to make you good in this viable civilian life you're seeking out here. So transition is always it's a word we use it too. Everybody uses it, but I like to think of it more like translating, taking that great skill set you got and figuring out how does that apply out here, because every bit of it applies. Everything we learn, courage, honor, commitment, all that stuff is out here. Discipline, attention to detail, all those 14 leadership traits that JJ did tie buckle for any other services. I'm pretty sure you use the same acronym, but that, all those great leadership traits, those leadership principles we learned them in the Corps. They apply out here. And as a matter of fact, I think they set you steps ahead of your teammates out here in the civilian world.
Well,
I think that's
you guys actually go a step forward too. After you finish the program, that's not the end of it. You hold, every biweekly, buddy checks? You get everybody on Zoom where, they can have that camaraderie, and they can talk about anything. Tell me a little bit about that. That's
funny, Eric. 2 things on that. One is, I got one of those tonight. So we have one tonight right in the middle of the Hockey Stanley playoffs, and we're going to be on those buddy checks tonight anyway, because that's our time. We got it scheduled. And so tonight at 7 p.m., our graduates are going to get together on what's called a buddy check. Now, all this stuff came about, it's just like anything we did in the military, that sometimes you take a bad situation, you play that hand, and you do good things with it. And when COVID was affecting our country in various COVID protocols, I'm going to go with that. COVID protocols were affecting our country in various ways, to where we couldn't get together and do the sessions anymore for various reasons. And so what we did was we didn't want our skills to deteriorate, so we started all reconnecting on Zoom, and we started doing this in terms of initially to train the trainers. That so our skills wouldn't deteriorate while we weren't doing active sessions. So we did it to just hone our skills. And they said, you know what? Now let's start. We started bringing in graduates at first to practice still presenting the material, and then we thought, no, let's just do this and start and continue after the session. So we do 2 times each month. We do what's called a refocus, which is taking the material they learned in the session and then going a deeper dive with it, taking it to another step further, and and also finding out how's this work for you out there, and here's some tips for how to continue to do it. And then we also do a buddy check 1 time a month, and that's just like the name implies. It's getting together. Hey, how you doing? What you been up to? Everybody shares their successes or struggles. There's sometimes it can become a lot of that. And again, just like we did when we were in the sessions, we were there for each other to give advice, or sometimes just be an ear to say it. As you remember, there's something very powerful to that. And I never really, it's kind of like the journaling thing. This is another thing I had no idea how well it worked, is there's something very powerful to just being amongst your brothers or brothers and sisters and just spilling it. Just something that you just, it's been a little bit of a stumbling block for your roadblock. It's been a rock you've been carrying around in your pack. There's something very powerful to just sharing it with your brothers and sisters, just saying it out loud and looking in their faces, and they're looking in yours, and you seeing that, you know what, they're not, this thing that I thought was staining me, they didn't look at me one bit different from before I said it to after I said it. They looked at me the same love, acceptance, compassion that they had for me before it, they had it for me afterward. And because a lot of us carry around things that we really shouldn't, that we really need to unload. And that we do that, we certainly do that in the session. We get those rocks and we pull them out of those packs and hopefully leave them on the ground there, or at least teach you how to break them into smaller rocks that you're carrying around less of. Yeah, I think it's very powerful.
So if you're a veteran out there and you're having some issues, you've been out a while, you haven't been out a while, and I know they accept active duty as well, you know, where can they go? Is it focusmarinesfoundation.org where they can go sign up?
You got it, Eric. Go to focusmarinesfoundation.org, and right there, when you open up that webpage, there's going to be 8 things on there that are going to say, you know, are you experiencing these things? You know, anxiety, depression, isolation, insomnia, various things. It's in negativity, self-doubt, these various things. It's going to put a little description in there. And if you see those things and you think, you know, 1, 2, 8, any of them apply to you, investigate a little further. There's some videos on that opening page that are going to tell you, from some graduates are going to tell you what that experience did for them, what that time and what that week out there at that incredible property. That's sacred ground out there at that farm. And there's going to be some testimonials. And if you see all that and you think that, you know, this may apply to me, contact us, and it's going to tell you how to contact us. Right at the bottom of that landing page, at the bottom, it's going to say contact us. Do that, or apply now, and apply. And I will tell you this, if you're in any way doubtful, like, yeah, it may apply, but it may not, we have a very good vetting process where people are going to contact you. They're going to reach, as soon as you contact us, we're going to reach back to you. And when they contact you, then they're going to find out, they're going to talk to you and find out where you are and if this program's a good fit for you. Because the last thing we want to do is waste somebody's time. You know, they'd like bring you out here, and it's really not the right fit for you. It's just what we're going to cover, where you are in life, maybe not. So if you have a doubt, just go through the application process, and we'll find that out in the vetting process. That maybe it's not, I'm betting it's going to be right for you, because I'm a big believer in the program. But if you have the doubt, do that. And another thing I would say is that veterans, we are so selfless that I think it's one of the things I absolutely love about veterans. They're people of service. They love to serve, and they always feel like they should take the short end of the stick. So when they see something like this, that's a great program, they're going to think, I don't want to take up a seat that somebody else needs more. I'm here to tell you, if you raised your right hand and you said, I do solemnly swear to support and defend, and when you did that, you volunteered to give everything up to it, including your life. Now that you're on the other side of that, you absolutely earn the right to live the life of your choosing. And that's what this is about, is getting to where you're living the life of your choosing. So if you want more out of life, because you could be you remember that 10-point pain scale that we use in all the military hospitals? Sir. If you're a 2 on there, or if you're a 22, this program will help you. If you just want more out of life, you've earned that. You've earned that by raising your right hand and giving of yourself during that time. Now on the other end of this, you want more out of life, this is a program for you. So I would strongly encourage you that even if you're only a 2 on the scale and you just want to learn these tools that we're going to teach you there, you want these tools in your toolbox, go through the application process and see if it's a good fit for you. That's my advice.
Well, Gunny, I'm running out of time here. thank you so much for being on Warfighters United. And again, that website is focusmarinesfoundation.org. You can find Warfighters United podcast on Facebook. Everything that we talk about in these podcasts, there are links on our Facebook page. And if you're a veteran having issues, feel free to contact me as well at warfightersunitedpodcast@gmail.com. Gunny, it's always great to talk with you, and I hope to catch up with you soon.
Absolutely, Eric, man. This is a blast reconnecting with you. Sorry if I get a little long-winded at times. My apologies.
No, you are good. I appreciate that, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, Semper Fi, buddy.
Hoorah, Hill.